I just left the courtroom for the bond hearing for my son.
Fact of the matter is, his trial team has won a number of points in this case.
We want to begin now with some breaking news. Rapper Lil Durk is...
Nobody expected this. Right after walking out of court, Lil Durk didn't look worried. He looked confident. And what he said next has the entire rap industry watching closely. Because behind the scenes, something strange is happening in this case.
The PC. Hey. Hey, I respect your mom forever. The PC.
Prosecutors are switching timelines. Key evidence is quietly being pulled back. And at the same time, new charges are suddenly being added, like a last-ditch effort to keep control of a case that might be slipping away. Even people like DJ Akademiks are starting to say the same thing, that Durk might actually have a real chance of beating this. But just when it looked like things were turning in his favor, everything flipped again. New allegations, secret witnesses, and a shocking claim involving $1 million that could change everything. At the center of it all is a story that goes deeper than just courtrooms, involving loyalty, betrayal, and what really happened after King Von lost his life. And now with a new court date set, the question isn't just if Lil Durk is coming home, it's who's really telling the truth. Right now, everything about this case is starting to look different than what people first believed. When Lil Durk was initially hit with these federal charges, the narrative seemed simple. Prosecutors came in confident, laying out a timeline that painted a clear picture. According to them, everything started around 2022. Flights, rentals, coordination, and ultimately a plan tied to retaliation. It sounded structured, calculated, and ready for trial. But as the case has progressed, that same timeline has started to shift.
Of the matter is, his trial team has won a number of points in this case. Some of the evidence that they wanted to use has actually been withdrawn so that the judge didn't have to exclude it. When they bought this case, they said the conspiracy started in August 2022. That's when Durk arranged to get these rentals, these flights. That's when he made arrangements for the bounty. Then they switched that and they said, actually, the conspiracy started back when Von, November 2020. And here's the big one. When they charged Durk, they said in the indictment about the bounty that at the direction of defendant Durk Banks, defendant Wilson, that's OTF Didi, would pay the bounty or monetary reward to the That's gone.
And that's where things get interesting. Because now, instead of sticking to one version of events, prosecutors have reportedly gone back and changed when this alleged conspiracy even began. At one point, they said it started in 2022. Then suddenly they pushed it all the way back to 2020. And in a courtroom, that kind of inconsistency doesn't just raise eyebrows. It creates opportunity. Opportunity for the defense. Durk's legal team has been paying close attention to every detail, and they've already managed to challenge parts of the government's argument. In fact, some pieces of evidence that were expected to be used never even made it in front of a jury. Instead of risking a judge throwing it out completely, it was pulled back before it could be tested. And that move alone tells you something important. It suggests that not everything the prosecution brought to the table was as solid as it first seemed. Now, at the same time, while certain arguments are being weakened, new ones are suddenly appearing. One of the biggest developments in this entire situation is the addition of a lesser charge, something that doesn't rely on proving money exchanges or organized payment, and that changes the strategy completely. Because instead of needing to prove that Durk directly funded or ordered something, the focus can shift toward influence, communication, and intent. It lowers the burden in some ways, making it easier to argue in front of a jury even if the bigger accusations don't fully stick. Legal experts sometimes refer to this kind of move as a fallback plan, not necessarily because the case is falling apart, but because trials are unpredictable. And when there's uncertainty, prosecutors often build multiple paths to a conviction instead of relying on just one. Still, outside the courtroom, people are interpreting it differently. Voices in the media and online have started questioning whether this signals doubt behind the scenes, whether it means the government isn't as confident as they once were. And when figures like DJ Akademiks speak on it, those opinions spread fast. According to him, This isn't just a normal adjustment. It's a sign that the case might not be as strong as it looked at first. But that's only one side of the story. Because while the defense may be finding openings, the prosecution is also adapting in real time. They're expanding the scope, bringing in additional theories, and preparing to present a version of events that still connects all the dots, even if some of the original pieces have changed. And that's what makes this situation so unpredictable. At the same time all of this is happening, another major development is unfolding, one that could impact everything moving forward. The trial itself isn't happening anytime soon. Instead of a quick resolution, the court has now set a new date much further down the line. And that delay does more than just push things back. It opens the door to possibilities that didn't exist before, including one that has people talking the most. The idea that Lil Durk could potentially be released before trial, not fully free, but under strict conditions like house arrest. Now, this isn't something that just happens easily, especially in federal cases. Judges take multiple factors into account: risk, influence, the nature of the charges. All of it matters. But what's interesting here is how far Durk's team is willing to go to make it happen. There are reports that his legal side has even proposed extreme monitoring conditions, the kind that go beyond standard house arrest. We're talking about constant supervision, limited movement, and full accountability for his location at all times. And in some discussions, even the idea of having a dedicated officer monitoring him directly. That level of control isn't typical, but it sends a message. It tells the court that the defense is serious about proving he's not a flight risk, not a danger, and willing to comply with whatever restrictions are necessary just to be out of a jail cell while waiting for trial. But even with those proposals on the table, nothing is guaranteed, because every step forward seems to come with something pushing back. And just when it looked like momentum might be shifting slightly in Durk's favor, another decision came down that could have a major impact when this case finally reaches a jury. The judge made it clear that certain pieces of evidence will be allowed, including material connected to King Von. Now that changes the emotional weight of this case entirely, because instead of being just about timelines and legal arguments, it introduces a narrative that juries can connect to on a much deeper level. Motive becomes clearer, context becomes stronger, and the story being told inside that courtroom becomes more powerful. From the prosecution's perspective, this is critical. They want to show not just what happened, but why it happened. And by tying events back to a loss that shook the rap world, they're building a storyline that goes beyond facts and into human emotion, something that can influence how a jury sees everything else. So on one side, you have a defense team finding cracks, challenging timelines, and pushing for release. On the other, you have prosecutors adjusting strategy, introducing new angles, and reinforcing motive. And right in the middle of all of it is Lil Durk, waiting, watching, and according to the people closest to him, still believing that when this all plays out, he's walking back home. While everything inside the courtroom continues to shift, what's happening outside might be just as revealing. Because ever since Lil Durk got locked up, the reaction from the industry hasn't been what a lot of people expected. At first, there was some noise, a few mentions here and there, but nothing close to the level of support you usually see when a major artist is facing a serious federal case. No consistent campaigns, no overwhelming public backing, no unified message from the rap world. And that silence didn't go unnoticed. In fact, it led to a message being shared from Durk's side that hit a little deeper than anything said in court. The idea that sometimes you don't really see who's with you until everything goes dark. That statement alone sparked conversations everywhere. Because in an industry built on loyalty, alliances, and public perception, people started asking questions. Who's really standing behind him? And more importantly, who isn't? Figures like DJ Akademiks didn't hold back when speaking on it either. According to him, this situation is exposing something a lot of artists don't want to admit. That support in the spotlight doesn't always translate when things get serious. He pointed out how quickly attention shifts, how some artists who were once closely connected suddenly move differently when legal pressure enters the picture. Not necessarily out of betrayal, but out of self-preservation. Because federal cases come with a different level of risk. And in that environment, even associations can become a liability. So while Durk is dealing with legal battles, there's also a personal realization happening at the same time, understanding who's really in his corner when everything is on the line. But just as that conversation started gaining traction, another development came out that shifted the focus right back to the case itself, and this one carried serious weight. New information began circulating about someone connected to the situation, someone who may have spoken about details that were never meant to be heard. The story goes that an individual tied to the case ended up speaking to a cellmate, not realizing that the person they were talking to could later become a source of information. Conversations that seemed private suddenly weren't so private anymore. And that's something that happens more often than people think. In federal cases, information doesn't just come from official investigations. Sometimes it comes from inside, from people who are already caught up in the situation, making decisions in moments they don't fully understand the consequences of. If those conversations are documented, recorded, or even just reported, they can become part of a much bigger picture. Now, whether every detail being shared publicly is accurate or not is a completely different question. Because once information starts spreading online, it tends to evolve. Pieces get added, stories get amplified, and speculation starts blending with reality. But from a legal standpoint, even the possibility of cooperating witnesses changes everything, because testimony can fill in gaps that physical evidence alone might not cover. And that's exactly why this next part matters so much. There are now claims that individuals connected to the case could be cooperating with authorities, not confirmed in full detail publicly, but discussed enough to raise serious attention. If that turns out to be true, it introduces a completely new layer to the situation. Because it's one thing to challenge timelines or question evidence, it's another thing entirely when someone involved starts telling their version of events directly to investigators. And that's where things can become unpredictable. At the same time, there's also been discussion about attempts to separate certain defendants from the main case. On the surface, that might not seem like a big deal, but legally it can have a major impact. When cases are tied together, prosecutors can present a broader narrative, connecting people, actions, and intent into one story. But when they're separated, that connection becomes harder to establish in front of a jury. Each person is looked at individually. Each argument stands on its own. And for someone like Durk, that could actually work in his favor. Because instead of being associated with everything happening around him, the focus narrows down to what can be directly proven about him specifically. Of course, that doesn't mean it's automatically a win. It just changes the way the case is presented. But not everyone is looking at these developments from a legal perspective. Some people are looking at it from a completely different angle, questioning motives behind certain decisions, wondering why things are happening the way they are, and whether there's more going on behind the scenes than what's being shown publicly. And that's where the conversation starts to blur between fact and speculation. Because once you introduce ideas like people cooperating, cases being split, and information being leaked, it becomes easy for narratives to form without full confirmation. Still, there's one detail that brought everything back into focus again. One detail that started trending across social media and quickly became one of the most talked about parts of this entire situation. A photo, not just any photo, but one that prosecutors are now using to support a much bigger claim. According to reports, there's an image from a few years back showing a large amount of cash, around $1 million, laid out in a way that, to most people, just looks like a typical flex. Something you've seen countless times from artists across the industry, but in this case, it's being interpreted differently, much differently, because now that same image is being connected to allegations that go far beyond just showing wealth. Prosecutors are suggesting that it represents something more, something tied directly to the accusations at the center of this case. Now, whether that interpretation holds up in court is another question entirely, because context matters. Timing matters, and proving what something means is very different from just showing what it looks like. Still, the fact that it's even being introduced changes how everything is viewed. It gives the prosecution another angle, another way to build their narrative, another piece to present in front of a jury. And just like that, a situation that briefly seemed to be shifting in Durk's favor suddenly feels uncertain again. Because every time progress is made on one side, Something new appears on the other. And as this case continues to unfold, one thing is becoming clearer than ever. This isn't just a straightforward legal battle. It's a back-and-forth situation where both sides are constantly adjusting, constantly responding, and constantly trying to stay one step ahead. And with so many moving pieces, the real outcome is still wide open. What makes this situation even more intense right now is that we're no longer just looking at a legal case. We're watching a full narrative battle play out in real time. And at the center of it all is Lil Durk, a name that carries weight not just in music, but now in a courtroom where everything is being questioned. Because as this case moves forward, it's becoming clear that perception might matter just as much as proof. And that's where things start to get complicated. When this first began, the story felt straightforward. Prosecutors had a timeline. They had a theory. They had a version of events that, on the surface, looked structured and ready to hold up in court. But now, that same timeline is being adjusted, stretched, and in some moments even challenged by their own changes. And that's something the defense is paying very close attention to. Because in a federal case, consistency is everything. If one part of the story shifts, it creates an opening. Not necessarily to prove innocence right away, but to introduce doubt. And doubt is powerful. It's the one thing that can completely change how a jury sees everything else. At the same time, voices outside the courtroom are starting to influence how people interpret all of this. Even someone like DJ Akademiks has been openly questioning the strength of the case. He's pointed out how unusual it is to see timelines change like this, how rare it is for key pieces of evidence to quietly disappear before they're fully challenged. And when someone with his platform starts saying things like that, people listen. But here's the reality. Public opinion doesn't decide the outcome. The courtroom does. And inside that courtroom, prosecutors aren't slowing down. If anything, they're adjusting. They're building alternative paths, adding new angles, introducing charges that don't rely on proving every single detail from the original claims. And that's not random. That's strategy. Because in high-profile cases like this, it's never about relying on just one argument. It's about making sure that if one part weakens, another part still stands. And that's exactly what we're starting to see. Now, at the same time, another layer is quietly building, and it might be one of the most important parts of this entire situation. Witnesses. There's growing conversation around the idea that individuals connected to this case could be cooperating. And while nothing has been fully confirmed publicly in detail, even the possibility changes everything. Because testimony hits differently. Documents can be challenged. Timelines can be questioned. But when a person takes the stand and tells a story, it creates a different kind of impact. It becomes personal, it becomes direct, and sometimes it becomes persuasive. But that also comes with risk. Because the defense doesn't just sit back and accept that testimony. They break it down, they question motives, they look at what that person might gain by speaking, and if they can create doubt around the witness, it can weaken the entire effect of what's being said. So once again, it comes back to trust. Who does the jury believe? That's the question everything is building toward. At the same time, the emotional side of this case is getting stronger, because now connections are being drawn back to King Von and what happened after his death. And that changes how this case feels. It's no longer just about legal arguments or timelines. It introduces motive in a way that people can understand emotionally. It gives context to why prosecutors are building the story the way they are. From their perspective, it's not just about what happened, it's about why it happened. And when you bring emotion into a courtroom, it can influence how everything else is received. But again, the defense sees that too. And their job is to separate emotion from evidence, to make sure that what a jury feels doesn't override what can actually be proven. That's the balance both sides are trying to control right now. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, another conversation is getting louder. And that's the industry reaction, or in some cases, the lack of it. For someone as big as Lil Durk, a lot of people expected overwhelming support, the kind of public backing you usually see when a major artist is facing serious charges. But instead, it's been quiet, and that silence is being noticed. It's led to discussions about loyalty, about how relationships change when legal pressure enters the picture, about how even strong connections in the music industry can shift when the stakes become real. DJ Akademiks has spoken on this too, pointing out that in situations like this, people move differently, not always out of disloyalty, but out of caution. Because federal cases don't just affect one person, they can affect everyone around them. And in that environment, even silence can send a message. But just when that conversation started to take over, another detail pulled the focus right back to the case itself. The money, more specifically, that photo, an image showing what's been described as around $1 million in cash. Now, to most people, especially in hip-hop culture, that kind of image isn't unusual. It's something that's been seen for years. Artists showing success, showing wealth, showing status. But in this case, and prosecutors are looking at it differently. They're suggesting that it could represent something more than just a display. Something tied to the bigger allegations. Now, whether that interpretation holds up in court is a completely different question, because context matters, timing matters, and proving what something means is a lot harder than just showing what it looks like. Still, the fact that it's even being introduced changes the conversation. It gives prosecutors another angle, another piece of the story, another way to try and connect everything together. And just like that, a moment that seemed neutral suddenly becomes significant. That's been the pattern this entire time. Every new development adds something, but also raises new questions. Every step forward comes with something pushing back. And that's why this case feels so unpredictable. Because there's no clear direction, not yet. On one side, the defense is finding openings, challenging timelines, questioning evidence, pushing for opportunities like pretrial release under strict conditions. On the other side, prosecutors are adapting, strengthening their narrative, expanding their strategy, making sure they're prepared for every possible outcome. And right in the middle of it all is Lil Durk, watching everything unfold, waiting for the moment where all of this moves from preparation to decision. Because that's where this is all heading. A courtroom, a jury, and a final moment where everything gets laid out. No more adjustments, no more behind-the-scenes moves, just arguments, evidence, and judgment. And until that moment comes, everything we're seeing right now is just part of the buildup, the moves before the final play. And if there's one thing this case has shown so far, it's that nothing about it is guaranteed. Now I want to hear from you. After everything that's come out, from the timeline changes to the new charges, from what DJ Akademiks is saying to the way Lil Durk is carrying himself through all of this, what do you think is really going on? Do you think the defense is actually breaking this case apart piece by piece? Or do you believe prosecutors are just playing it smart, building multiple angles to make sure they still win in the end? And what about the connection to King Von? Do you think that's going to have a major impact when this goes in front of a jury? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is one of those situations where every perspective matters. And if you're locked in on updates like this, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Because as this case continues to unfold, we're going to be breaking down every move, every twist, and every new detail you need to know. This story isn't over, not even close, and the next update could change everything.